Welcome to the show. My guest today is Dean Hullings, the Global Defense Solutions Strategist for Forescout Technologies. Dean, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Let me set a little context for our discussion before we get started. Back in April 2019, the Homeland Security Department issued a binding operational directive, a BOD, to require agencies to patch critical vulnerabilities in 15 days. This cut the time period in half of the previous 2015 BOD requiring patches in 30 days. Now, patching of networks and systems has been a huge problem for agencies for much of the past 25 years. I can go all the way back to 2004, when the Government Accountability Office found agencies struggled with risk assessments and testing all patches before deployment. This is why something like the basic concept of comply to connect is such an easy concept to get behind. Now, if you're not familiar with comply to connect, we're going to delve deeper into that in a minute or two, but let me just give you the top line. It requires new devices to meet security requirements before they're allowed to connect to a network. An automated process scans, analyzes, ensures the device is patched and up to date. The Marine Corps has led this effort, and now DISA is planning to expand it in the coming year. In fact, the Marine Corps issued a policy last May explaining how C2C will work. DISA issued a request for information in June seeking a platform that would give real-time visibility to all IP endpoint, network infrastructure, and Internet of Things devices. So a lot to talk about. So with that context in place, let's turn back to my guest, Dean Hullings. He is the Global Defense Solutions Strategist for Forescout Technologies. Comply to Connect is one of those programs that there's so much potential there, Dean. There's so much excitement around it. What are some of the key aspects of the program? Help us understand it a little bit more.
Yeah, Jason, you hit a couple very key points there on those early directives. And so the Comply to Connect program was really developed to hit two key aspects. One is there were existing tools, and those tools are still used today on DoD networks, but they didn't have all of the effectiveness that they needed. In other words, there were gaps in some of the security that those tools brought to the table. And then the second key point was making things more efficient for the operators, for the administrators of the networks. So finding a tool and finding a capability and bringing that into an enterprise approach is what Comply to Connect is designed to deliver.
Now, this is Comply to Connect is a concept. Obviously it's a policy for the Marine Corps. It's something that DoD is looking at more broadly, but it's not a simple use this tool at this time. I mean, it's like when we talk about zero trust, it's really a framework. It's bigger than just a single tool, right?
It is, and that's one of the reasons why it took a while for the government the DoD to finalize on their approach. They didn't want to throw away everything that they had already put in place, like the HBSS or host-based security system from the past, or the Assured Compliance Assessment Solution, the ACAS program. They wanted to build on those capabilities. They wanted to deliver automation to make those capabilities more robust and still let them and the investments that they've put in them still give benefits to the networks as a whole. So yes, this is a broad scope now. You mentioned the Marine Corps, and they were one of the big pathfinders of the Comply to Connect effort, as was the Navy in their next generation network program, in really establishing what should that framework look like, what tools work together the best to provide that automation and effectiveness that they were looking for with this program.
So we know those two are as you mentioned, the pathfinders are. Walk me through who is participating in Comply to Connect, who can participate. Give me a sense.
Yeah, so initially it was pretty much just the Marine Corps and the Navy, and then there were other pockets of early adopters, we'll call them, across disparate organizations in the DoD. For instance, the Army's Medical Command adopted it very early, as did the Defense Information Systems Agency, or DISA, for their own operational network. They too were early adopters. And now what the DoD is doing under DISA's lead is they formed a program management office to bring all of those disparate efforts together into a standardized approach, one that will give them greater efficiencies and greater benefits for the investments that they're making.
And I imagine the Army is looking at this. I imagine the Air Force is looking at this in some way. I imagine some of the defense agencies, the Fourth Estate. Is this starting to, is there some sort of mandate or some sort of interest from the DoD CIO's office at large?
Yes, there is. There's been a memorandum to describe the key aspects and the timeline for implementation of Comply to Connect. It's been in the works for some times, but as you can imagine, with an enterprise approach, we're not just talking about a couple people that get to vote, right? There's lots of people that get to say what's good, what's bad, how does it fit their individual organizations. So the Army and the Air Force are in fact doing some of their own efforts to see how the Comply to Connect capabilities will be applied, will be implemented across their environments. And so we see that coming out very soon. And then you mentioned the Fourth Estates as well. There's an awful lot of enterprise effort into bring together the Fourth Estates into the DISA's network, and they're going to rename their network the DoD Net. And therefore that one's a little bit slower in adoption, just because the Comply to Connect program is only one part of a greater initiative.
Now, the memo, whenever I hear the word memo, it gets me a little bit excited. Is there a memo out or a memo being worked on? Because to us, that becomes big news, right? Someone releases a memo, we go, uh-oh, we get excited.
Sure, and that memo in early stages had an awful lot of guidance, an awful lot of directives, even with specific milestones. Certainly, we haven't seen that memo come out yet, but it is anticipated, and some of the early adopters and other customers that really want to get into the Comply to Connect program are waiting for that memo with bated breath, because they want to get started, because they understand that their networks are at risk, and they understand that Comply to Connect can deliver them capabilities that will help them secure it not only today, but looking to their future as well.
It's actually a great segue for why the time is now for Comply to Connect. It seems like, as I went through the opening, patch management has been so difficult for agencies. Ensuring the IoT devices that are growing in large numbers are meeting certain security baselines. It just seems like the time is right, and the need is immediate.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The proliferation of devices that are connected in society today is also driving that same connectivity and the same reliance on these devices across DoD operations. So as you get more complex, so does the need for having greater security and greater tools that work together to provide a wider solution. And then let's not forget that our adversaries have a vote too, right? So the sophistication of what they're doing with their cyber attacks, at the same time as the complexity of all these devices being connected, is really what brings about a new capability, a new program, and a new framework that Comply to Connect is going to be delivering. Really mandates that, so we can make sure the most critical missions and the cyber connectivity that they depend upon are secure.
It's interesting you bring up that it's as much as the adversaries as anything else that's kind of driving this. And I think what DoD has seen over the last, if you will, 15, 20 years is a change in threats. We've seen it gone from just being annoying, like denial of service attacks, to really disruptive attacks, to stealing IP. And I think that's part of why something like Comply to Connect is becoming so much more important. Is the laptop, is the device or the PC or whatever you're using to connect back to the network has been secured, and if there's a problem, DoD's got to do everything they can to keep it off the network. Is that what's been driving this concept?
Yes, and you mentioned the laptops or the desktops, and absolutely, it's a clear problem that's been documented and reported upon on, you know, breaches that have been caused by malicious activities or just plain mistakes of users or administrators that are not keeping the basic cyber hygiene and some of those very basic cybersecurity requirements up to date, up to speed. And so what that does is that may not be the target, right? So what those kinds of breaches provide is for an adversary to get into a network. And now once you're in a network, an adversary can do lateral movement and get to what they're really out after. You mentioned intellectual property. That's, you know, IP and stealing data, stealing information is something that gets reported upon often. Our personal data gets reported on that it's been stolen or breached on networks. But in a military standpoint as well, what's that adversary doing? Are they leaving malicious code behind that could create an unknown effect onto a network? So while in industry or in our personal lives, it might mean we lose something if our information is breached. And there's business aspects to that as well with industry partners, and they might lose financial data and all those kinds of things. They're all very bad, but in a military standpoint, you know, a cybersecurity breach also has implications to the mission, and dare I say, implications to our servicemen and women's lives could be at stake.
Yeah, I think people forget that, you know, the lateral movement is probably the biggest challenge that we see. Once they get on the network, what do they do once they're there? Is in the Comply to Connect, walk me through why Comply to Connect is stopping, or at least trying to, if you will, make it harder for the adversaries to get at that foothold.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that is often overlooked. But if you look at a lot of the recent breaches, as we were talking, they hit an IoT device or some kind of non-traditional device that is now connected to networks. Really, that connection was made for efficiency of those operations. So a security camera, say, that is now IP connected and bringing back the video that they're staring at all day, every day, back to a server somewhere, so an ops center, a security ops center, can analyze that and watch that from afar. But all it takes is getting into the network and then that lateral movement that you're talking about. So you have to have an understanding of everything that's connected to the network, and you have to be able to continuously monitor all of those devices that are connected to the network in order to stop those kinds of breaches from happening. And so certainly that's what Comply to Connect has attempted to achieve in delivering their capabilities, and then integrating all of those tools together so they work together to stop that lateral movement, to make sure that a device that is supposed to be a security camera or a printer is in fact acting like and only operating like a security camera or a printer, instead of now reaching out to other databases or other services on the network that they shouldn't have any need to access. And that's an indicator that something has gone wrong and needs to be controlled, needs to be contained, needs to be stopped.
We're going to talk a little bit about some of those other systems and how Comply to Connect brings them all together and integrates them after the break. But Dean, let's take a quick break. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network.